Welcome to our keynote. Our speaker is Jeremy Rossman. He is one of the founders of Make School, and if you guys don't know what that is, he's going to tell you all about it.
All right. Thanks, Mark. So I actually have two hats in this event. One is the sponsor hat that allows me to talk a little bit about me and Make School and what our company does, and the other one is the keynote speaker hat, in which I will tell you a little bit more about why I think attending events like these is incredibly exciting and what the future has in store for students like you who are building the skills that you've developed and are competing with today. So I'm going to start with the What's Make School All About part, and then we'll transition into the inspiring keynote talk that leaves you really, really motivated part. So, and let's, non-cooperative clicker. Let's try it again. There we go. Alrighty. So I am from the first generation of students that had the App Store in high school. It came out when I was in my senior year, and I went to Menlo, so I'm actually local to the area. Any Menlo students in the audience? All right. So while at Menlo, my co-founder and I had met in computer science class, and we both launched apps. His app got 50,000 copies sold in the App Store. Mine was featured on the front page of the App Store. And this was a very transformational experience for us. For the first time in history, a high school student could spend weeks or months working on a project that could end up in the pockets of thousands, if not millions of people. And that distribution network, that ability to work on something that could end up in so many people's hands, was actually not there beforehand. And you might think, well, Jeremy, but the internet existed. The fact of the matter was, back then, for a high school student to get a website live that was their own custom-built website was also quite difficult. Amazon Web Services, Heroku, a number of products that now exist to make your lives easier in getting your projects online were not around. They were just emerging. And so I was in this first generation that really understood the power of programming as applied to building products. Finally, you didn't have to wait till the end of your educational career to make impact. You could build something today that could end up in the hands of your peers and make a real difference in the world. And that completely shaped the way that I started perceiving my education. I left MIT to start Make School in 2012, and I am also amusingly somewhat well known in Japan now. Make School is as well. We are more than half funded by Japanese investors, and so in a weird quirk of fate, I have kind of a Tokyo fan club. I've actually been recognized on the streets of Tokyo twice. A little bit about Make School. So we started in 2012. We were funded by this local investment firm called Y Combinator. They also funded companies like Dropbox and Reddit and Airbnb. So we're in the same family as those companies as far as investors are concerned. And the house that we started in Palo Alto, actually inspired the house in the HBO Silicon Valley show. One of my housemates at the time was the president of Y Combinator, Sam Altman. His high school friend was a writer for the show. And at the time that they were writing the script for the HBO Silicon Valley show, they interviewed my housemate about, well, what is it like living in Silicon Valley? Where do you live? And if you look at the episode of the show where they get into a self-driving car and give the address of their house, it's actually located on a map at the intersection, exactly at the corner that our house was located. And we found out it was not a coincidence. Make School is a computer science and software engineering school headquartered in San Francisco. We teach students primarily CS, software engineering, product development, with a hint of entrepreneurship. We treat the process of building a product, like your app, a sort of microcosm for the process of launching a business, and try to understand all the aspects that go into it, from design to market research to development, launch, marketing, iteration, and so on and so forth. Last summer, we had 210 students in the United States, as well as 180 at a pilot program we ran in Taipei. And those 210 students were located in San Francisco, Sunnyvale, and New York City, though we're adding new locations this year. And we run two kinds of programs: a summer program for students like you, and a 2-year program that is an alternative to university I'll tell you about in just a second. So our summer program has 3 tracks: an introductory track, a games track, and an apps track, offered in 4-week and 8-week formats. So if you have friends, siblings who've never programmed before, and you want them to learn how to program in the context of building an iPhone app, our intro track would be great. And it's also compliant with the new AP Computer Science curriculum that the College Board is launching next year. For those of you in the audience who are experienced programmers, our games or abstracts are a good fit for you. And we've had a number of students from basically all the schools that you all go to, because we have a lot of folks from the Bay Area. And half the students in the program are in high school, half are in college. Last summer, we had students coming from 20 different countries. So literally, kind of the United Nations of smart programmers coming to Make School over the summer to build an awesome product. And when I say from 20 different countries, I mean literally like hopping on the plane to come and study at Make School over the summer. The curriculum that we developed for the summer program started being used at MIT in 2013 for their first ever mobile development course. One of the core fundamental principles behind Make School and what motivates our team is trying to bridge the gap between traditional education and the needs of industry. Right now, there's an incredible power that lies in your hands as programmers that is kind of underexploited. You really can do a lot more than school is teaching you by default how to do. And as very, very closely tied to industry and very, very passionate about empowering high school students to live up to their full potential with programming, we've been offering programs to kind of supplement traditional education. And that's why MIT, not having had before Make School an iOS development class, started using our curriculum. Carnegie Mellon, even in the Silicon Valley campus here, also started using our curriculum for a master's level iPhone development class. The same curriculum that high school students do every summer at Make School was a master's level iOS development class at Carnegie Mellon, and I actually taught it myself. We are going to have locations this summer in Sunnyvale, so right next door, San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York City, Taipei, Tokyo, and Singapore. So Make School is going worldwide. And we had 210 students last summer. We're looking at over 600 this year in the United States alone, and a few hundred more internationally. And we're very, very excited to have that global reach, and we've noticed that demand for this program has really been coming from every corner of the world, and we couldn't be more excited about it. In the program, you design, code, and launch your own iOS app, and students who have made apps for this program have gone on to do a number of wonderful things. Every year for the past 3 years, students who've gone to Make School have won an award to present their app at the White House and been flown out to DC to present that. You can imagine that looks pretty good in your college applications. We have had students work at a number of top Silicon Valley companies and go to every top school you can imagine, and most of them tell us that Make School was an integral part of helping them get ahead in their academic or professional careers. So some examples. Let me first show you. So this was the house we started in. This was our first summer program, actually in a living room in a house in Palo Alto. So that's how Make School started. And the president of Y Combinator, who's the investor behind, Reddit, Airbnb, so on and so forth, actually came and gave a guest talk at Make School in our driveway, because at the time the program was running in the living room, there was no lecture hall. Now Make School is a lot bigger, graduated in 2014 to a bigger office, and in 2015 to this space in San Francisco. This is one of our 3 spaces last summer. You can see a version of me with much longer hair. And in this space, we had 90 students studying simultaneously, about half of them in high school, half of them in college. So you can see Make School doesn't look like a classroom, looks kind of like a co-working space. Every student has their own desk, they're working on their own projects, and they're being facilitated by instructors who all come from industry. And that is critical. We have only instructors who have prior professional experience in the technologies that they're teaching. We select them, of course, to be very, very good teachers as well, but this is a big differentiating factor. The people who taught at Make School last summer are now at companies like Apple and Google, or came from those companies before teaching at Make School. And that's an incredible opportunity to get connected to folks in industry and learn the actual best practices. So some of our alums, Katie, who actually came from Harker, was a 2012 student in our summer program, then went to MIT, then got jobs at Dropbox and Square. Lisa was in a 2013 summer class, then got into Carnegie Mellon, then went to get a job at Google. We have Chris was at Menlo, 2012 class in a program, then got to Stanford, Dropbox, Google, Facebook are the 3 internships he got afterwards. Carol is the one to beat. Carol, with her brother Paul, made an app called Name That Jam that got hundreds of thousands of downloads. They launched at the end of our summer program, and they are still the winners in terms of download count out of our summer program. And after Make School summer program, Carol got into Princeton, and then she did her next internship the summer after Make School at Facebook. Phil was actually already an MIT student, MIT CS major. We get a lot of those too. So this is a program, again, half the students are in high school, the other half are mostly college students who are actually computer science majors. Phil was a computer science major at MIT, one of several MIT students who came to Make School that summer, and then the next summer got internships at Snapchat, and then this coming summer will be working at Google. Phil said, that the environment provided at Make School was one that was not even available at a school like MIT. And we have a number of quotes like this, too many to fit on a slide, but just a few here. Make School is the most valuable and enjoyable educational experience I've ever had. I learned more in 2 months than I did in 3 years of college. And the accelerated nature of the program and exposure to the startup culture and community dramatically changed my outlook and radically expanded my career opportunities. So the youngest students in our program are 13, and actually, amusingly, they tend to beat the college CS majors at launching their apps. So they finish them first. But we have a wide range of students from a wide range of abilities, but all of them achieving amazing things. Some of the largest hackathons in the country are run by Make School students or Make School alums. Local hackathons like HS Hacks, hackathons like Hack Princeton, Hack MIT, Hack Duke are all being run by folks who spent a summer at Make School. We also have distinguished international alumni who have started companies abroad. A programming school in China called Super Academy is being run by a Make School alum. One of our alumni from Tunisia just gave a talk to 1,000 young Tunisian high school programmers in Tunis. And the first ever hackathon in Jamaica was organized by a Make School alum. So we're very, very proud of our alumni community. And if you go to Make School over the summer, you are getting plugged into a group of alums that you will then be able to find at every top school in the country and every top company. If you're at Google this summer, there'll be 4 Make School alums working there. We even have one who was hired, I found out a week ago, at Tesla. If you go to Carnegie Mellon, Stanford, MIT, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, UC Berkeley, you will be in an environment where there are also Make School students. And most of them will be in leadership positions, either teaching others how to program, starting events, getting the top jobs. And so this is really an opportunity to join a really quite elite group of students who really have launched themselves forward by building a really awesome product and making impact after just a summer. We have students who've made applications to teach STEM to girls in rural communities abroad. We have students who have made applications to track attendance to sports games at their high school. If any of you did go to Menlo, you would have heard of the app Sea of Gold that was made by a Make School alum who now goes to Menlo High School, and everyone at Menlo has that app. So in contexts that are small, like building an application that everyone at your high school has downloaded, or contexts that are large, like building games that have been downloaded by hundreds of thousands, or that can be impactful domestically or internationally, Make School is a place to launch that app. The other program we run is one that scares parents a little bit. It's a 2-year alternative to university. So that is something you do after high school instead of going to college. But it's not dropping out. It's a full-time school located in San Francisco. I'm not at all an advocate of not going to school, not part of the dropout community or dropout promoter network. I am saying that for a small number of students, whereas the Summer Academy I think all of you would love, for a small number of students who already know for sure that you want to end up working at a tech company in Silicon Valley, which is something that most 18-year-olds don't know. But if you know that for sure, we are the best place to be. We don't have research opportunities, but that's on purpose. We are not a research university. We are a product-focused institution. All of our instructors are former engineers who will be teaching you the best practices from industry. And it's not just a purely technical education. It's not just a mobile application education. It's a comprehensive university alternative with non-technical content, writing, communication, public speaking, as well as computer science fundamentals all the way through mobile and web development. Many, many parents have told me when I mentioned this program to them a year ago that they would not send their kids because big companies would never hire out of this program, since every company on their website says that to apply, you need to be in a program that's degree granting. And since Make School is not degree granting, surely you could never get a job at a great Silicon Valley company. Maybe only a small startup would ever hire you. It turns out that this top recruiting company in the Valley called TripleByte, which connects folks to companies funded by Y Combinator, did a survey amongst about 1,000 Silicon Valley companies, including companies like Airbnb, so many billion-dollar companies. And they found that the thing that excites companies the most are engineers who are motivated by building great products. And since Make School is a product-focused institution where every time you're learning a new technology, you have to launch a product in that technology, and of course, along the way, learn a lot more than just programming, we produce a type of student that's actually very attractive to Silicon Valley companies. This is a photo from our demo night where 150 companies showed up to meet our 30 students. You've probably heard of a college career fair. This was reversed. Instead of students waiting in line to meet companies, companies are waiting in line to meet our students. Representatives from companies like Dropbox, Google, Uber, Lyft were all in the audience. So these are a few shots from that event. And these are our corporate partners. So companies like Lyft and LinkedIn have officially partnered with Make School to come recruit out of the program. Even though we are not degree granting, they have acknowledged that we are a place that their university recruiting team should be hiring from. And so this tells you that in a short year since launching this program, we have established ourselves as a place that top companies are sending their university recruiting teams. So hopefully this reassures the parents that we're not at all advocating not going to school. In fact, this is so much like school that the university recruiting teams at companies show up to come hire from us. 2 weeks ago, Google hired one of our students. In the past, we ran a test of this program with a smaller number of students, and Snapchat, Pandora, and Edmodo all hired out of that program. So we have confirmed hires, Snapchat, Pandora, Edmodo, Google, all these companies that are coming to hire out of Make School this year. And we were announced as the only private company affiliated with a new White House initiative to help bring digital literacy across the nation. Make School students at school are building a tool that the White House is going to promote to 20 million Americans who will be getting broadband internet for the first time. This is an initiative called Connect All, funded and announced by President Obama. And when that initiative goes live, 20 million more Americans will have access to high-speed internet, and the first thing that they will see is a tool that was built by Make School students at Make School. So this fits really well in the theme of our students learning by doing and making impact while studying. So, enough about Make School. Now for the inspirational keynote talk. The fact of the matter is that what you can do today behind a laptop is unprecedented. And I alluded to it earlier, you know, the App Store exists, these web services exist, now all of a sudden you can launch things that in the pockets of millions that you couldn't have if you had gone to high school just a few short years earlier. In fact, the number of services that you can access on the internet to power applications that you write is absolutely unprecedented. You now have access to services like Transcriptic, which is a biology lab in the cloud. Behind a computer, you can program biology experiments, and a robotic-controlled lab in the cloud can execute them. So whereas 2 years ago, if you wanted to do biology experiments, you needed your own biology lab or access to one, now a programmer behind a computer can do biology research. One of the Y Combinator partners is working on a new company that is a robotics lab in the cloud. Used to be that if you wanted to program robots, you needed access to a robot. But now you can rent time on a world-class robot, write code, run it in that robot in a remote facility, get high-speed video of the result, and actually do robotics research, again, behind your laptop. The number of APIs and other services that your programs can access to do things like have a real person in the real world pick up something from point A and deliver it to point B are incredible. If you wanted, 5 years ago, an app that you wrote to recognize a face, you had to write a facial recognition algorithm. If you wanted an app that you wrote to have someone pick something up from point A and bring it to point B, you'd have to hire a team of people to be ready at any moment to do that. Now, you can write one line of code, access a third-party service that's done it for you, get your face recognized, your package delivered, and much, much, much more. Now, in particular, the skill that you're practicing today is an exercise in competing around the fundamentals of computer science with perhaps a bit of a more mathematical orientation. And this is a skill set that is unbelievably important, because for all that I talk about the beauty of using computer science to build products, the people who can build the best products have a mix of two skills. One being an understanding of what makes a good product, but the other, a fundamental and comprehensive understanding of the fundamentals of computer science and software engineering. And that is what comes from attending events like these and practicing the skills that you need to have to win events like these. And companies value what you are doing incredibly highly. And I want to show you some examples of companies that you would never expect to be using the types of skills that you're developing and the industries that they are in. So when I was a programmer in your shoes in high school at Menlo, I thought that programming was this thing that could one day let me make games and social apps. It was all about building the next Google, the next Facebook, or the next League, the next StarCraft. The fact of the matter is, yes, programming can be used to solve problems in those domains, and they can be very, very interesting. You better believe that if you have millions of players in a game at the same time, the math and algorithms behind the scenes to make that run smoothly are fascinating. However, Nowadays, it's important to realize that programming and computer science have a much, much farther reach, and that everything we do in this world, in some way, shape, or form, is going to be influenced by code. Here's an example. Raptor Maps. Raptor Maps is a drone company that flies drones over farmland, takes photos, and automatically, algorithmically tells the farmers how well their farms are doing. They have software that can look at a picture of a potato farm from the view of a drone and tell you that this corner has a sprinkler that's broken because it's not been watered, this corner is ready to harvest, and down here you need more fertilizer. And it can tell because they have an intelligent machine learning algorithm that has looked over thousands of samples in the past of thirsty fields, ready to harvest fields, fields in distress, and figured out dynamically on a per photo basis what is going on in each field. The algorithms to do this are really, really interesting. This was actually founded by a friend of mine at MIT who worked with me on my very, very first iPhone app that was featured by Apple. So I went off to start Make School, he went off to start Raptor Maps. Council is a service that will take a little bit of your spit, start sequencing your DNA, and give you important insights about your health and your compatibility with a potential partner with whom you want to have kids. And to be able to figure out insights from the millions of base pairs of DNA that they can sequence, you need actually some pretty interesting algorithms and pretty interesting math around data analysis to infer what exactly is going on, where there are correlations. This is actually quite a controversial thing. Some people are very uncomfortable with the idea of testing your DNA and your spouse's DNA before having kids. But in the new generation of folks having children, this is becoming an increasingly popular type of service to learn more about yourself and about the statistics and probabilities that are encoded in your genes. Palantir is a company that's ubiquitous in Palo Alto that has a really interesting brand that does not tell you what they actually do. Palantir is the company that has shirts that say, "Save the Shire." And so they try to attract people who love Lord of the Rings to go work there. The reality of the matter is that they mostly do work for the finance industry and for government. My friend did a summer internship at Palantir where he used complex algorithms to determine, based on the topographical data of where a soldier is standing, where a sniper could be hiding and have a direct line of sight. That data was then encoded and sent directly to the soldier's heads-up display where it was projected onto their retina. That's the kind of work that he did at Palantir. That's a pretty awesome summer internship. And they have an incredible number of clients in government, in defense, in finance, doing really, really advanced data visualization and working on software that is being deployed in situations that probably we would never end up in, but at the same time, we'd be quite proud to have our code running in. And I had no idea. If you had told me in high school that what I was learning in CS class and what I was trying to get better at through programming competitions was the same skill set that Palantir would interview me on later in my life to try and see if I was a good fit for writing code for robots to go rescue folks in the battlefield, I would have been completely shocked. I had no idea. My idea of a fun computer science project in high school was to build a game. And I had never thought of expanding my horizon and thinking, how can I build or write code that uses my technical knowledge and applies it to something far greater with greater reach and greater impact. Wit.ai does something very, very interesting. They're a service that makes it very, very easy for any software that you write to understand spoken word. So you have a user speak into your app or device that you've written. It sends it to Wit.ai's servers, and Wit.ai interprets what the actions or commands are. The example they give here is if a user is sitting on their couch and the remote is out of reach, and they say, "I'm feeling hot," then Wit will automatically invoke home.sendTemperature. And this is a very small example of a very, very far-reaching piece of technology. Now, on the programmer side, this is really cool. If you're working on a cool project, you should use Wit.ai to make it even more awesome. You can talk to the app that you're building and have it do something cool. But also think that the types of algorithms that you've been practicing and competing on today are the types of algorithms that are the fundamentals behind the technology that Wit servers are running on to interpret the words being spoken by users and return actionable information. Cruz is a really interesting example and also a very important note for your future careers. What is the company that everyone knows is working on self-driving cars? Uber, Google. Those are both good answers. In fact, you might be surprised to find out that Google owns a huge part of Uber. So it's very funny that Uber and Google are competing at self-driving car technology, even though Google owns a large part of Uber. Those are the two companies that you've heard of. And if you were a young student excited to work on self-driving cars, you might think your dream is to go work for Google. It turns out, though, an important note for your career is that oftentimes there are startups working on similar problems that are moving faster, that are nimbler, and that have smaller teams where you can have greater impact. The team at Google that is working on self-driving cars is going to solve a fundamental problem for this century. But if you worked at Google 5 years ago on that self-driving car company, you're still waiting to be able to tell your parents and your friends exactly what you work on and to show it off to them. In the meantime, in 2013, maybe even early 2014, a startup called Cruz was founded. Also funded by Y Combinator, same folks who funded Make School, a small team. I know a couple good friends of mine joined very, very early on. There were just 6 of them in the beginning, building self-driving cars. And their first product was an attachment that would work on Audi cars to make them self-driving on the highway. Now, they weren't solving the full problem. Google is working on solving the full problem. And that's why it might be another few years before we really hear anything of it. In the meantime, this small team, every employee on that team was able to have incredible impact, contribute meaningfully to the final product. The code that even their interns wrote ended up running on the actual device that they were developing. And last week, General Motors bought Cruz for $1 billion. $1 billion. I remember in 2015, when I had friends who were in robotics at university who didn't even consider applying to Cruz because their dream was to work at Google or at Uber on self-driving cars. They were a little bit blinded by the brands of these big companies. And I want you to understand and realize that in your careers, sometimes brands have diminishing value. And in fact, the relationship kind of flips as soon as you leave college. While you're in education, big brands are good and well recognized. The moment that you enter the workforce, typically, the bigger brands are riding on the fact that they're a big brand. And the places where you can have really the most interesting work and the most impact are typically smaller companies. And wouldn't you want to be part of the team of 12 or 15 that just got $1 billion acquisition from General Motors? I would be willing to bet that Cruise technology will be in General Motors cars used by the public sooner than anything Google is working on will be used by the public. I'm not 100% sure I'm going to win that bet, but I'm pretty darn sure I'm going to win that bet. And if you're a young student, you want to be working on the products that can impact the world today more than trying to shoot for the famous brand that might have you for 10 years on a project that never sees the light of day. Clara is another fun one, an e-assistant. You CC Clara in emails, and she's an AI that will schedule all your meetings for you. A very, very small thing that can save humanity millions of hours of time. I mean, the teachers in the room can probably appreciate just how annoying it is to schedule meetings and schedule anything, really. You probably spend too much of your time, more than you would ever like to, on scheduling things for students, in between faculty, for schools. And this is an AI that will look at your calendar, who's smart, who can understand English, not all of English, but scheduling English, and will plan meetings for you. A huge number of people in the Silicon Valley that I work with use Clara. And I know this because when I email them like, hey, we need to meet, they reply saying, great, Clara will find a time. And they CC Clara. And then Clara is so I talk to an AI like on a weekly basis. So, AI is not this abstract concept of the future. AI is something that is already talking to me and scheduling meetings with me on a weekly basis. And again, the underpinnings of Clara are very, very much resting on mathematical and algorithmic foundations that are very, very important to learn. So I want to close out the talk by giving you a little bit of insight into what a startup is. Because now I've given you all these examples of startup companies, except for Palantir, which is a big company, but the rest of them were startups. What is a startup? And how do we understand what is actually going on in the Silicon Valley craziness without understanding what a startup fundamentally is? So what is a startup? Does anyone know? Yes. So when you have an idea, you get a partner, you want to make it a reality. That is a more general definition, I would say, of a business or a company, which is it's a perfect definition. This is how you start a company. But what companies are startups, and why do we keep on talking about startups in the Silicon Valley? Yes. They are small companies. Could be, but is a lemonade stand, which is a small company, is that a startup? Groundbreaking technology, small company. We're getting somewhere. The definition that I've seen used most often in the Silicon Valley is a company that is going to try and grow exponentially with linear work. So there's many types of companies that you can grow linearly with linear work. You'd imagine, for example, that if you want to open a new Starbucks, you need just as many resources to open the next 5 as you do the next 10 in 2016. Starbucks has a linear reward. They make more money from every Starbucks store for linear effort. They have to buy a store, hire the employees, and so on and so forth. They get some economies of scale, right? Some benefits from having lots of stores that reduce their costs, but fundamentally does not change the big O, let's say, of their returns. In contrast, a company like Facebook or Instagram can serve millions of customers with only a handful of engineers. So the reason why we see so often startups associated with groundbreaking technology is that most companies that can do this are companies that have some sort of technological component. The most powerful way to grow exponentially with linear effort has been, in the past 10, 20 years, the internet, and using it in some way. And it's becoming more broadly software, using software and the power of computers to automate, to improve, to accelerate your growth. This is why we can have startups that are startups that target farming, startups that target transportation, startups that target social media, startups that target games, and so on and so forth. So a startup is not just a company that is purely a tech company. It's a company that is trying to grow exponentially and oftentimes is using tech to do so. That means that the world is not limited to startup ideas that fall in the mold of, Snapchat, Twitter, Instagram. This weekend, I met a startup founder who is working on a device that parents wear right around their necks that records the number of words that they speak to their newborn children and gives them a goal every day. It turns out that there's a generational shift going on right now where the new generation of people having kids are addicted to smartphones. And it turns out that babies have a hard time competing with smartphones. And so the number of words per day being spoken to newborns, even in well-educated and wealthy families, has dropped compared to previous years as young parents are spending more time on their phones. And so this startup is building a device to help millennial parents remember that they need to be talking to their kids. As it turns out, one of the biggest predictors of educational success, especially in primary school, and the age at which you start reading, is actually how often your parents speak to you and the complexity of vocabulary they use in your presence. Your brain is soaking that all in as you're a young child, right? So that is a startup. That's a startup that I met this weekend at an investment event full of Silicon Valley people. And that's the kind of startup that you don't hear about enough. You only hear about Snapchat, Instagram, Kik, and so on and so forth because you're customers of those products. But you need to realize that there is so much more out there. The media is not talking about this because it's not of general appeal, but it still has general impact on society. And the number of companies that I haven't even mentioned that are incredibly impactful are unbelievably huge, and we never really talk about them. I'd also like to say that there tends to be a correlation between startup success and domain knowledge. If you understand some part of the world really well, you can build some sort of solution for that part of the world. I firmly believe that because there is an underrepresentation of women among startup founders, there are many billion-dollar companies that don't exist today because women haven't started them yet. And these are, companies that perhaps men would be less likely to think of. So I would think of market opportunities actually around the types of startups that people are not thinking about. Everyone is trying to make the next Snapchat. There's like 1,000 college kids working on that like today. But how many people are trying to change the way that millennial parents raise their kids? I've only heard of one company, right? And there could be more. So keep that in mind as you, especially having grown up in the Silicon Valley, are undoubtedly going to be drawn in by the appeal of entrepreneurship in the startup world. Don't forget that it can lead to so much more than just the next Snapchat or Instagram. So how do startups get funded? This is kind of weird. I'll give you a very quick economics lesson. In most businesses, which, by the way, most businesses in the world are not startups. Most businesses in the United States are not startups. Most companies that people start are not and do not have to be startups. You don't have to try to grow exponentially. Starbucks is a great business, right? If you started Starbucks, you'd be a very happy camper. But Starbucks is not a startup, does not have to be. If you want to start a traditional business, linear work, linear reward, typically you get funding from investors who are not looking to take risks. And oftentimes that's a bank. So in the lemonade stand example, a bank might say, Jeremy, I'm going to give you $1,000 to start Jeremy Lemonade Stands Incorporated. And in a year, you'll pay me back like $1,060. Okay? If you don't pay me back, I'll take your lemonade stand. So basically the way banks work is we give you money, we don't want to take risks, so we want to see a really plausible way to get our money back. If I make $1 million from a lemonade stand, doesn't matter. They only want their $60 profit. And if I don't give it back to them, they take my stuff. So very low risk for them. Banks love giving you money if there's stuff you can promise that they'll take if you don't pay them back. Venture capitalists, which are the people who invest in startups, also smaller investors in startups are known as angel investors, are types of people who will buy a percent of your company. So instead of giving me $1,000 and saying, I want $1,060 back, they'll say, I'll give you $1,000 for 10% of your lemonade stand business. If I get $1,000 for 10% of my business, how much is my business worth? $100,000. So now you know whenever you see a company out there saying $10,000, right? Sorry. Whenever you see a company out there, and it says like, oh my gosh, Uber valued at $26 billion, all that means is it's the percent that the last person bought from Uber and how much they paid extrapolated out to 100%. In fact, LinkedIn a couple months ago had their share price drop from 200 to 120 per share. They lost billions of dollars of value. And how is it possible that a company could be worth some billions of dollars one day and a few hours later be worth billions of dollars less? What actually happened is that someone sold a share to someone at $200 per share, which when multiplied by the number of shares gave you a certain number of billions. And then for like 6 hours, people tried selling shares of LinkedIn and no one wanted to buy them because they had seen bad news about LinkedIn. No one wanted to buy, no one wanted to buy. And the first person who was able to sell a share was at 120. I'm skipping a few details in between, but that's effectively what happened in the span of like a couple hours. And all of a sudden, the value of LinkedIn snapped from 200 a share multiplied by the number of shares to 120 a share multiplied by the number of shares. So that's what valuations of companies actually are. The amount bought multiplied by the total amount that there is, that's the value of a company. So these investors, they only make their money back when they have a way of selling their percent back to someone else. If you own 10% of my lemonade stand, counterintuitively, you don't have a right to 10% of the lemonade revenues or profits that I make. You have 10% of my company, period. Some companies are worth a lot, but they don't have revenues. There was a time and day when Facebook was worth a huge amount of money and had never made a single dollar because investors were betting that one day they would be able to make money by adding ads. And they were right. Facebook makes tons of money now. So it's not about how much money you make necessarily, it's about how much people think you're worth and how much they're willing to pay. So, banks, low risk, take a percent that's fixed, take your stuff if you don't pay back. Venture investors, buy a percent of your company, and then later hope that they can sell it back to someone. The two ways they can sell it, to another company. Facebook bought Instagram, the people who own some percent of Instagram got lots of money. Or they can go public, which also is known as going IPO, which means that anyone in the world can actually buy their shares. These are the two ways that startups make money. And this is why they try to grow really fast. Because they only make money, the investors only do, by having the value of what they own grow a lot. And so they want that 10% that was worth $10,000, they want me to grow the business so it's now worth $100,000, and they can sell their 10% to someone else and make a 10x return. So the Silicon Valley is full of companies that are trying to grow really, really fast with investors that want them to. And if they don't succeed at doing so, most investors would rather companies kind of just drop than end up somewhere safe in the middle, which sounds weird. But most investors in the Silicon Valley make so much money from the people who manage to be successful that the rest of the companies basically don't matter. So they'd rather you take a shot at becoming the next Facebook or fail, because anywhere in between, well, you're not the next Facebook, and having one Facebook that you invested in is worth more than 100 companies that end up somewhere in between. Which is why not every project has to be a startup. And this is the thing I see young students all the time. They're working on something cool. They're like, I have a startup now. You don't have to have a startup. If you're working on a project, you're working on something that you're doing for your own personal growth. You're doing it to become better at what you want to do. If you're doing a product, you're doing it to make other people happy, to get revenue, to get more users. But not either have to be a startup. You can have a very, very successful business, a very successful product that doesn't have to be your startup. And with so much of the media talking about HBO Silicon Valley show, how startups work, there's not enough people now talking about how to make a really great product that people like, that makes you some money and makes you happy, and your customers happy too. So don't forget as you go through high school and college that you will be surrounded by people in the 21st century using software to build products and launching them, and that they might think they have startups in their hands. They might be trying to go big or go broke, and that is not a model you have to follow. If you land on something that is growing really, really fast, exponentially, for linear effort, then maybe you have an opportunity to start a startup. Maybe you can get some investors. But you don't have to try and shoot for that. You can also just try to build great, interesting things. So my prompt to you as you think about what you can do with software is, what aspect of the world do you know well? As young high school students in the Silicon Valley, the answer is not that much, unfortunately. You have a narrow perspective on the world. Most people in America go to community colleges or don't go to college. Yet you mostly know people who go to college. That in itself means that your perspective on the world is from a segment of the population that is very unusual. What part of the world do you know well? What do you know that applies to a lot of people, or that a small number of people care a lot about? I'll give you one example to get you thinking. One of my students had a family member going through end-of-life care for Alzheimer's, and as a result came to know a lot about our medical care system as it applies to elderly folk going through debilitating diseases. And he all of a sudden had tons of ideas on how he could build products to make that part of the world better. The crucial thing that I'm getting at here is the part of the world that you know well will lead you down a path of building the next League of Legends or the next Snapchat. But since there is so much more potential, you owe it to yourselves to think a little bit more deeply about what do you actually understand, what do people care about, that could lead you to create something that could actually be impactful and solve a problem for a lot of people or solve a big problem for a small number of people. So make something that people want is the unofficial slogan of the investment group that gave Make School its first ever investor. And it's my ending prompt to you, is that over time, as you go out in the world and gain this amazing superpower that is programming, that is computer science, that is software engineering, that you become amongst a small but increasing group of people who can control computers and make them do what you want to do great things. With that power, make something people want. And you might think, well, people do want a better Snapchat, but the reality is that's not what people need. The world needs something better. So that is my ending message. And to close, I want to say that this is a special link that you can snap a picture of that will bump you to the very top of our application line. Right now, we have on the order over 1,000 pending applications. I think 1,300 total in the system. We're going through them as fast as we can. If you apply normally on Make School, you'll be at the bottom of that line. If you use this link, you'll get bumped to the top. So if you have a need to make summer plans soonish, you want to get to the top of the line, you should go to that link. It'll tag your account. And I must say that if you log in with Facebook, make sure that your Facebook account is one that is attached to an email that you read, because we'll be emailing you more information about your application. With that, I'm Jeremy. We'll be outside. Happy to talk to you more. I'm going to hand it back over to the organizers.